Lou Carcolh is a fearsome, giant, snail-like serpent from French folklore, particularly from the Landes region, known as a massive, slimy predator that dwells in caves, and it was known for capturing its victims with long, hairy tentacles to devour them whole, symbolizing hidden dangers and often depicting a grotesque yet slow beast, sometimes appearing as a landform itself. Now, hold on. I want to talk about this because I'm reading an AI overview right now. It says stuff like symbolizing hidden dangers. Let me tell you something and be straight up about Lou Carcolh and gigantic snails and stuff, especially when you look back into the Dark Ages. This is something you're going to be taught. This is something your children are being taught right now. And if you go into modern academic systems, they're going to teach you that legendary tribes of mutated human beings did not exist. They're going to tell you that gigantic insects in the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages did not exist. They're going to tell you that strange, gigantic flowers and trees and all these weird things that we see depicted did not exist. They're going to tell you knights didn't actually fight snails. They're going to tell you that, none of these things existed, that they were all symbolic, every single one of them. And I'm here to tell you that there are thousands upon thousands of evidences and proofs in the form of manuscripts and art and drawings and bestiaries and explorers and cartographers and prominent people from times long past who have testified themselves and left the evidence to us today. Now, if we're going to take hundreds of thousands of examples from antiquity that speak on actual people who actually met and fought with or worked with or witnessed eyewitness reports of people who met real monsters during the Dark Ages, and we're going to simply minimize that and dismiss it and call it symbolic or say it's internalized, then we do ourselves a huge disservice. Okay? I don't like to talk about monsters just because it's, I'm some Dungeons and Dragons nerd, even though I am. I like to talk about them because I know they're real. That's it. The prospect, that's what's exciting about it. They're real. So forget the symbolism. Anytime you hear, that something's going to tell you, oh, this just symbolized, caves were scary, so they put a giant snail story in there to scare young children or whatever. No, there was a giant snail, and probably more than one. Now, the appearance of the Lou Carcolh was a hybrid of a giant snail and a serpent, featuring a huge shell, a long, slim body, and multiple hairy tentacles emerging from its mouth. Its habitat, it lived in subterranean caves. It lived in subterranean caves, particularly beneath the town of Hastings in southwestern France. It hunted. It extended its tentacles through tunnels, ensnaring unsuspecting people or animals and leaving a trail of slime as a warning. I'm going to show you real-life examples where these creatures really do this. This is actually how snails hunt, or some slugs, some snails, some worms, and stuff today. But they're on a small size. And what you're going to learn in this presentation is throughout different epochs going back in time, our world goes through periods of gigantism. Okay, those periods of gigantism lead to gigantic flora and fauna, specifically in the insectoid department. Giant bugs, giant plants, especially those things that grow giant quicker when introduced to more oxygen in the atmosphere, which is called an oxidation event. What was the nature of the Lou Carcolh, the giant snail monster that lived in the caves of France? A slow but inevitable predator, sometimes seen as a type of dragon representing the hidden threats of the natural world. No, it was a hidden threat of the natural world. It didn't represent it, it was. Local lore, the term Carcolh also became a nickname for Hastings. The locals warning young women, the Carcolh will catch you. So this is an actual story that people told to their children and discussed amongst, gossip at the local scuttlebutt or whatever. And the Carcolh wasn't the only one, especially around the 1700s in recent history in France, right? You also had the Beast of Gévaudan. The Beast of Gévaudan was this gigantic, hairy, rat-like creature that was a scourge to the entire French countryside. So much so, this was not a myth, okay? And this is just an example. I just wanted to throw this in there as a bonus. But it was discussed and seen as a reality, so much so that the King of France insisted that the entire country go on a monster hunt to finally exterminate that beast. So, gigantism, once again, coming in and out of our world. We quickly forget about it as things shrink back down, or we go around exterminating those gigantic creatures. But let's go all the way back to the Renaissance times, or the medieval times, the Dark Ages specifically, okay? The Dark Ages were a time where the population was much lower. You have to think about that, okay? The official records would say around the year 800, approximately, AD, right? Which is like the 9th century AD. The entire world's population was something like 22 million, approximately. So, the fact that they're saying that they were building all these castles to like guard against the other human beings, and they're constantly at war with other families and stuff, man, you'd be lucky if you ran into another human being at that time with such a low population across the world. They built these giant castles to keep monsters out and away, to repel gigantic plasmic entities in the sky, in a sky that was electromagnetically amplified. But one other thing that they tried to keep away was gigantic insects, especially those that could easily climb over castle walls and stuff and hurt people. Gigantic snails. So here we see an image of a guy who is dropping his sword. He has a huge, gigantic snail above him on what appears to be like the leaves of a tree or something, about to fall, and he's terrified. I'd be terrified too. Snails are not benign, little, innocent creatures. They're seen that way right now because, kids pick them up in the garden snails, people play with them and stuff. But those things that we consider to be benign today would be monstrous and life-threatening if you increase their size going back hundreds of years, okay? And this applies to all creatures, but especially the insect, all families of bugs, insects. I don't care the science behind what it's technically, if it's technically a slug or a worm or whatever, I don't care. To me, they're all bugs. So I'm just going to call them bugs, okay? Insects, bugs, all the same stuff, okay? Now, if we look at some of these medieval pictures, people would try to internalize this and say, oh, well, here's clearly a snail's shell, and it's large enough for a cat to fit inside of. So people will say, oh, they were combining the symbolism of a cat with the symbol of a snail's shell, or the symbol of a shell with the symbol of a bird. Or there was literally, physically, historically gigantic snails that existed, and other creatures, when those snails died, used their shells for protection, or to live in, or to hide in. Oftentimes, the snails themselves were depicted as being threatening looking, angry, oftentimes. Why? Because a snail can eat you if it's big enough. And I'm going to show you some snails eating fish and gigantic creatures and stuff too, a little towards the end. Now, this one's an interesting curiosity. This one comes to us from the early Middle Ages. Hold on, let me zoom in on this. So, at first glance, if you were to see this within an ancient manuscript, you might think, oh, it's just a bunch of dogs, attacking some random guys, some old guy and some dude here, and just dogs, right? They look like dogs. But these are not dogs. These, as much as they look like dogs, okay, you have to remember, sometimes people didn't know what they were dealing with, and they needed to convey stuff to others. So they cartoonified the image because they didn't know how to draw a gigantic ant. which is what these are. Okay, I've looked this up on many fronts to check and double check my research. You're welcome to do it as well. Okay, for now, I ask you to, take my word for it until you find out for yourself. All right, and I encourage you to find out for yourself. Screenshot the image, reverse Google search it, look it up. This is from a manuscript, and I had the manuscript pulled up, and that's why I'm saying this right now, because I closed the window for some reason. But anyways, these are depicting an anthill and gigantic ants that were known to dig up gold flakes from inside of the earth. And they would kick up all of this gold dust. And these guys over here are actually trying to go retrieve the gold dust from the gigantic ants. They were said to be as large as dogs or small goats or sheep. This is how they were compared. And this is not the only story of gigantic ants by any means in the Dark Ages. There's been a few videos where I featured the stories of these gigantic ants. One story that comes to mind is the voyage of the Maldwyn. It's a Irish tale, an old Irish tale of the Maldwyn. And they came to an island that had these gigantic ants, and they were so afraid and so terrified that they left the island right away as the ants all stacked on top of each other, coming out to the boat, floating, making a land bridge out of themselves to crawl on top of themselves to try to attack the travelers and the explorers that were on the Maldwyn, which is this explorer's boat. So we have the gigantic ants throughout antiquity, but let's focus back on these snails, right? Oftentimes we have knights fighting the snails, right? And I've talked about this. I want to mention the knight. I've got some knight's armor here in my bedroom. I sort of live in my own version of Wayne Manor, or like Batman's house, like a little museum of all the cool things that I like to research. But the knight's armor, I don't believe that knights wore armor to protect themselves in human battles, to fight against human beings. Of course not. Have you ever seen some of that the knight's armor from antiquity, especially the heavy metals and stuff? It's difficult, nearly impossible to fight somebody else. It's difficult to move around in such heavy metallic armor, especially when you have these huge, cumbersome helmets with little slits or cheese grater looking masks and stuff. You know, many of you have gone trick-or-treating as kids and you wore those plastic masks with a little rubber band around them and they have these tiny little slits. You can't see anything. Okay, so don't try to tell me that knights were the elite fighting force in the armies of nobility at the time. They were not. These were monster hunters. They fought what I call phantazoids. They fought gigantic insectoids and giants, and they wore oftentimes metallic coverings and metallic armor because of the electrified atmosphere that existed at the time. They didn't want to get struck by electricity or, have the dragon breathe its plasma breath all over them or whatever. So these were Faraday cages that they wore around their body to protect themselves. And here they are fighting gigantic insects or bugs. Gigantic snails. They were a menace. Why were there so many gigantic snails? I want to look this up real quick, just on the fly. What is the perfect... I have not looked this up yet. What is the perfect... perfect living environment for snails? I'm just going to ask ChatGPT. I hate ChatGPT, but, I can ask it basic stuff, okay? So a high humidity environment consisting of moist air drying out is fatal to snails. So makes sense if we had gigantic snails during the time of the Middle Ages. Hold on, let me ask this. How does an increase in oxygen, this is called the scientific method, by the way. How does an increase in oxygen directly affect the size of a growing snail? I mean, I have a feeling I know what it's going to tell me. An increase in oxygen allows a growing snail to get more usable energy per unit time, which directly affects size. with a faster growth rate. More oxygen available to tissues, cells can divide and grow faster during development. Larger maximum body size. Oxygen is a limiting factor for soft body animals. Raising that limit allows larger overall mass before respiration becomes insufficient. Thicker and larger cells. So it becomes gigantic. So we go back during the time of the medieval times, the Dark Ages, and let's suppose, right, that the oxygen content was more during that time, and that because there's more of these gases in the atmosphere, that there's more electricity and stuff ambient in the atmosphere as well. But that oxygen will directly affect the plants, by the way, that do breathe oxygen when there's less sunlight, and there would be less sunlight if you had a depressurization event in the atmosphere, which I talk about quite often, actually. If you have a rapid depressurization, which is a necessity in a closed system, otherwise the system will just blow up, okay? Or everything in it will die because there'll be too much pressure. So it needs to release that pressure from time to time. When our atmosphere depressurizes, it instantly creates fog. It instantly creates mist, just like if you're in a pressurized cabin plane and you're flying up in an airplane and a window breaks out or someone opens the door or something, the whole plane will suddenly fill with fog and mist and stuff. Same thing will happen in our world if the atmosphere depressurizes and a hole in the dome breaks open, or however you want to see, your cosmology. So what would that give us? That would give us a high, humid environment, right? Which is perfect for snails to grow and live in. And they would become gigantic, as would other insects. And I should also expect there to be, because there's implications to this, right? I'm hypothesizing. I'm also researching, and I'm performing thought experiments. If it's true for the snail, could it also be true for other insects and insectoids? Yes. If that's the case, shouldn't we expect to find other insectoids that are gigantic in nature, discussed, talked about, and portrayed all throughout the Dark Ages? Yes, we should, and yes, we do. We do find those things. So here we are again. They were a nuisance, gigantic snails, knights fighting them all over the place, using spears. We can get a feel for how large these were. Here's the knight. Here's a long spear. Unless you want to make the case that the human is tiny, then that's your path. You'll have to go down. Okay, I support the gigantism in our world. And I do believe people shrink over time, and that we're actually much smaller because of the increase in pressure. And then we will grow larger as gigantism returns. But when we grow small, so does the insects, and so does everything else, the plants and everything, right? All right, cool. So here's another one. Oftentimes these snails are in the air. I've noticed that too in a lot of these drawings, almost like I don't want to say they're flying snails, because that doesn't make sense to me. I'm not saying that because it doesn't make sense to me, it's not possible. Let's not make that mistake either. But maybe it's falling from something, like how it showed the snail on top of the leaves. Maybe the trees were larger back then. Maybe it fell down, and maybe that's one way that it attacked people, was to fall on top of them or something. I don't know. Here we have, again, this one looks like it's like a worm, but it's all coiled up around itself. It also has the traditional antenna. So some people might make the case that this is a snake. It's not a snake. We actually have the shells of these particular types of snails in the fossil record today. Gigantic shells of gigantic snail fossils. I think they call them ammonites or something. Hold on, let me look it up. Ammonite shell? Is that what it's called? Yeah, ammonites. So if you look up ammonite, you can... These people are going to try to tell you it's all kinds of anything but a snail shell. And to me, that looks very much like a snail shell. But that's just what it looks like to me. So we've got the knights clearly fighting gigantic snails. That would be a nuisance. These things could obviously, if it came into your house or something, you've got a newborn in your house, it's going to cover and smother the babies in the house. Some of these are poisonous, and I'm going to show those to you as well. Some snails have toxins that can kill human beings. Some snails will open up their mouths and just wrap themselves around their prey. And I'll show you that too in action. This guy looks like he's trying to touch it. Like, you know how you could poke its eye and its eye goes back in? That's kind of looks like what's happening right here to me. I don't know. Or I don't know, maybe he's trying to pet it. I don't know what's happening. Maybe it swallowed something and he needs to get it out of the snail. I don't know. But he's not attacking it with his weapon, as you would think, right? Now, all of this gigantism of insects, this is shown to you in pop culture as well, all the time. For example, there's a popular video game called Fallout, and I play Fallout 4 specifically with my son, and we watch the television series called Fallout as well. They show you exactly what I'm teaching you is a reality. They portray it as if it's just fiction and made up, but it's not. Every single thing in that show is a reality, or once was a reality. It might be painted larger than life, but it's still a reality. So in that cartoon/video game, they have what they call radiation roaches, or rad roaches, gigantic cockroaches that grew to like enormous sizes, and they will eat human beings. They're not just creepy little critters or anything. So imagine living in a world where we have things like that. And those, like I said, those snail shells will be left behind for all kinds of creatures to crawl up into. You know, it's like let's say you're homeless during the dark ages, right? And you happen upon this giant snail shell that you can like sleep in and like cover up at night and be safe from the elements and stuff. And then you might pop your head out if you hear some, you know, passers-by or whatever. There's another one where the snail is kind of like lifting itself up to get this night. This was a pretty large one too. Now, once again, people will say, this is all symbolic. This is just, it's symbolizing, you know, one thing or another. I'm telling you, it's not symbolic at all. That they're clearly showing you the reality of the medieval world, right? Where we had these creatures. And oftentimes, I'm going to show you what they look like. That if you put these things to a gigantic size, they stop looking like insects. They start looking almost cute. Almost. It depends on the type of insect, okay? But snails almost look cute when they're gigantic, because we have gigantic snails today, not as big as the ones during the medieval times, but we have giant ones, and I'll show you those too. They look like they have the faces of a rabbit. A giant snail looks like a rabbit. If you just take the face, okay, I'll show you. But this guy's like praying to it. This one looks like it's suspended in the air or fell off of a leaf or something, as I said before. This guy looks like he's asking it to go away, almost like maybe he can communicate to it, which I believe that if you increase the electrical field in the atmosphere, that you can also increase telepathic abilities. So maybe he is trying to talk to the snail. I don't know. And then we have other depictions and drawings of hunting parties, people who went out to actually hunt these gigantic creatures. These were the monster hunters of antiquity. Those existed. Okay, when this all happened, the thing that introduces gigantism into the world is a cataclysmic event. So the humans go into hiding. They go underground mostly, and they wait things out. They find cave systems, or they have bunkers or whatever. And then when they come back to the surface, holy cow, they have to deal with gigantism now all of a sudden, and monsters and mutated, surface dwellers and ghouls and freaking, zombies and stuff like that. So they go out and they start killing it. They start fixing the world, or trying to clear it away or whatever, so that they can claim their land and live safely up on the surface or whatever. So they develop monster hunters and monster hunting parties and stuff. They go out looking for these creatures. Now, if we have sufficiently sized snail shells, not only would you want to go hunt them just to get rid of them because they're a nuisance and they can kill you, they can eat you, they can hurt your family and stuff, but you would want the shell. That would be very valuable in a time like that, right? If it's big enough, that could be like a little mini house. That could be a little portable house, that you could take with you and live inside of it and have some form of, protection or whatever. And so we have a few different depictions of people actually living in them. I'm not sure what's happening here in this picture. It looks like he's peeing. I can't tell if that's just smudged or if someone's, I don't know. I can't tell. Maybe that's a woman. But clearly whoever it is holding a club. And do you see these leaves? These are leaves. You see how big those leaves are? Gigantic leaves falling from what I assume to be a gigantic tree. Now let's look at this snail. Look closely at its face. You can see its little trail of slime right there. If you look closely at its face, you can see it almost has what appear to be tentacles coming out of its face. So oftentimes, and there is radiation to take into consideration. Okay, if you follow the plasma apocalypse, as I've been teaching people and as I write about in my books, the surface world will be irradiated in many different places. So that radiation will lead to mutations. So on top of that, if creatures live longer, which is what oxidation of the atmosphere oftentimes, comes along, it goes hand in hand with a longer lifespan. Somebody just subscribed, Tammy Hall. Hey, high five, Tammy Hall. Anyways, my point is, when creatures live longer and they grow larger in size, plants, insects, animals, humans, they oftentimes will continue to grow different bodily features that we're not used to seeing when they have short lifespans. So this one right here appears to have tentacles, just like the cave snail that we began talking about was rumored to have these tentacles coming off of its face. This one is interesting too, because one, we don't just have a blue sky. We've got swirly stuff in the sky. It's not just a wallpaper pattern, okay? They put stuff like this in the sky because they saw stuff like this in the sky. My interpretation of this is that this is plasma that was swirling about in the wind and moving around. Possibly. It's a possibility, but it's just definitely not just a blue sky. And then here we have what appears to be some kind of a bunker. So look closely at it, right? It's got a staircase. It's going what appears to be into the ground or into the earth, and there's like a mound. This is exactly how modern day bunkers, that's my notification sound. Bonus points if you know what that sound is from. Let me turn off my notifications. Anyways, this looks like a modern day bunker. Forget this giant rat or cat or whatever that is, and forget the giant snail. That looks like a bunker, a doomsday bunker, to me personally, okay? You got the stairs that go down into it. It's got a hatch covering and stuff. But then we have this creature, which appears at first glance to be like a gigantic rodent or maybe a feline cat or something. I can't really tell. But whatever it is, it's large, and it is by no means the size of a bug, which is what this is, a gigantic snail with a huge shell, and it's coming out to meet it. We've got this guy, another guy praying to the shell. That looks like a prayer to me. He looks like he's praying, please, please leave us alone. Please stop eating our cats, or whatever, the story goes, right? This is more of a modern depiction. So this concept survived antiquity, and made it so that we have depictions of it time and time again. This is stuck in our collective subconscious across the world. There's a reason why we want to include these types of creatures and monsters in our movies and our comic books and our drawings and stuff. Here's another one right there. And here's the knight way over here, looking pretty scared, I might say. If I'm going to interpret his facial expression, he looks terrified. Would you be terrified if you came face to face with a gigantic insect of some kind? Right? This, by the way, I want to point something out about these dogs. At first glance, examine these things, okay? Examine them, because at first glance, you might just say, oh, it's just a pack of hunting dogs. But this one in particular, this white one with the pink nose, this is a specific kind of hunting dog. That's not easy to find, but once you know what kind this is, it almost has like a greyhound look to it, but it's not. This is a giant hunting dog of the Tartarian Empire. How do I know that? Because I study ancient cartography and I study ancient maps and stuff. And you will find ancient maps of the Tartarians, who were rumored to be giants themselves, who raised these albino or white giant hunting dogs. And they took them with them everywhere they went. They were nomadic in nature. Here's a dude on a horse charging at a snail. Now, listen, some of these snails can project. Some of these giant worms and slugs and snails and stuff like that can actually spit things at you, which is why it's important for these people to keep a distance. They have toxins. Many of them have toxins. Okay. And like I said, many of them are not cannibal. Well, many of them actually are cannibalistic. They will eat other snails and stuff. But they're also carnivorous, as well as scavengers and stuff. But they can shoot things out of their mouths. Sometimes tendrils, sometimes slime. I'll show you some real world examples of that here coming up. Here we have another creature guarding itself against another gigantic snail that looks to be moving in that particular direction. Here are some more examples of people living during the Dark Ages, medieval times, a medieval drawing of people living inside of snail shells. Now, another thing that people might tell you, all of this is dismissed by modern academics, and therefore modern people who are raised under the hood of modern academia. People will tell you, oh, this is just an old, story, like your modern cartoons or whatever. And so this is just a picture of an old story, like the little old woman that lived in a shoe or whatever, right? And they will dismiss it, even though there's actual giant snails right here moving around. And you can see the castles in the countryside that were built to protect from gigantic creatures and monsters, basically, right? And you can see the people. This lady cut a window out of the snail's shell. Gigantic snail houses. It's great, especially for poor people. If you don't have, I assume that these people are poorer than the people that live way back there inside of that castle in the distance, right? So when you're a nomad in post-apocalyptic times, which I believe to be medieval times and the Dark Ages, you're going to take what you can get. And coming across a gigantic snail shell, it doesn't have to be a snail. Also, it can be giant oysters. There's giant crabs. I think I have some examples of the giant crabs, giant lobsters, crustaceans. Those are all bugs, just so you know. Okay. Those will grow to gigantic sizes as well. Their size is proportional to how much oxygen is around them, because they breathe through their skin. The more oxygen, the larger they get. There will be gigantic crabs and spiders and all kinds of stuff that's depicted and shown to us in movies and fiction that no one today thinks is real, but it gives them the freaking shivers. Why would it give them the shivers if it's not real? If it's not an actual possibility? Oh, it's just crazy to think about. Okay, well, like I have a can of soda right here. If I made a movie about the evil giant can of soda, would that scare you? No, it wouldn't, because, there's nothing scary about a can of soda, no matter how big it is. Even if you animate it and make it come to life, that's not going to terrify you. This terrifies people, though. Like clowns terrify people. Like so many of those things that stem to us or come to us stemming from an ancient reality. This guy looks like he's got something to like a little thing to throw. He's like spinning something to throw at the snail. You see that? How he's kind of spinning it? What do you call those things? Spin them and you throw them at people or whatever? Yeah. So this guy over here has a huge lance. Now look at the lance. The lance actually has something on it, which to me looks like a worm. Many people would say a snake, but I don't think he'd be super concerned about a snake. Also, we see some huge tree branch or something that seems to be down here. Let's take a look at what's on his lance. Maybe he's feeding this to the snail, now that I think about it. It could be, right? He might not be trying to kill it. He might be trying to, like, appease it. What did they say on the movie The Mist? When they wanted to appease the monsters? What's that word that they use? The religious lady? Remember the Christian lady who's like super, wacko, basically? Expiation, right? This is expiation when you try to appease the monsters or phantazoids or whatever. I think he's trying to feed it a worm, a giant worm. Doesn't that look what it looks like? That doesn't look like a snake. Maybe it is a snake. I don't know. But whatever it is, it looks like he's trying to feed it to the snail. Why else would it be on there? You know what I mean? Interesting. So we have another one here of a knight on a horse. And he's charging at this gigantic snail, trying to take care of business, right? It's not as easy as just like how today you just would step on one and just get rid of it. And There's pictures like this of people riding the snails, taming them, right? Which I believe people would also do. They would try to find a way to use this to their advantage so that they can go defeat their enemies or whatever. Now, you have to imagine if a snail is much larger, it's going to move much faster. It's not going to go so slow on the ground, maybe when it's this big, okay? But if you're a tiny little person, the size of an ant, that snail is moving pretty fast past you. You know what I'm saying? So if you increase the size of the snail, it becomes a giant, fast snail. This one's kind of interesting because I can see the imprint of some silhouette. Maybe this is from another page and it leaked onto this page. But once again, this snail looks like it's in the air, doesn't it? Right? This guy has a long spear. He wants to stay away from the snail. It's not like they just walk up to it with a hammer like, oh, it's just a snail, no problem. Smash it. No. They needed to keep their distance from these snails. Why? I don't know. Could it be that the snails had some way of jumping or leaping or flinging themselves at others? Or maybe they just fell from giant trees or something? I don't know. Here it is again. Look at the leaves. Look at the leaves. It's not just simple decoration in a book. Meaningless decoration, I should say. Gigantic leaves from a huge branch. And this guy is up there asking a floating snail that's attached to nothing for forgiveness. He put his sword down and everything. He's pleading with it. That's interesting to me. I wonder if they're telepathic. I don't know. I'm not sure what this is. This dude's trying to fight some sort of creature. It looks like a giant bug of some kind. There is a giant butterfly or a moth or something hanging above his head. As you can clearly see, it's the size of his whole body. And there's some kind of, I don't know what this is. Bat. It looks like it has like a worm center part with like bat wings or something. I don't know what that is, but it's some sort of gigantic bug. It's got 2 antennae right there. You can see that. But the reason I wanted to share this wasn't so much because of whatever weird bug he's fighting, but because of this particular tree right here. I see these all throughout the Dark Ages. Gigantic vegetables or flowers that we today misinterpret as just artistic, strange renditions of trees of the time. I don't think so. I think people knew how to draw. They knew how to draw a human. They knew what humans look like. Boom, there's a human, right? I'm pretty sure they would know what a tree looks like, don't you? They know what leaves look like, right? Certain types of leaves and stuff. You're telling me they don't know how to draw a tree? They always draw trees that look like asparagus or broccoli or flowers like this one. Let's take a look at this, actually. I want to see this one. Look at that. It's cut off right there, so I can't show you more of it. But you'll see these types of gigantic flowers, which is what this is. Like I said, it's not just the insect kingdom that suffered gigantism. This is an ant on top of a gigantic person, some kind of ant creature. Okay, that's how I'm going to interpret that. There's also these glowing orbs in the sky in the background. I believe these to be ball lightning. But here we have some guy, looks like he's waking up from a sleeping outside on the ground or something, and he wakes up to an ant eating his face. Medieval gigantic ants. Here's another depiction. There's a lot of depictions of these giant ants. Unfortunately, it's hard to compare them. It's not like they hold up something to compare them. The other one, we have a human to compare it to, so we can tell it's gigantic. But here, you wouldn't be able to tell that they're gigantic, even if you said, this is wheat or something. Who knows how big that wheat is? You know what I mean? Here's another one. People will interpret this all kinds of different ways. They'll try to tell you it's this, that, or the other thing. I'm telling you, it looks to me to be a medieval drawing of an ant, a gigantic ant. And this is its mound. And it goes down inside of that little anthill. Now, we'll skip from the snails, right, to another type of bug that has a crust on it, crustaceans. Crabs. This is a bug. Just let's be clear. Crabs, crustaceans, shellfish. I hate that they put the word fish with a shell. There's no such thing as a shellfish. It's a bug. Okay, it's an insect. you know, freaking lobsters, all that kind of stuff. They're pulling this gigantic thing out of the ocean. Maybe they were bug eaters. I don't know. But we also find other examples. This is all going to be bonus, okay? Just for a moment. Giant lobsters. Okay, look how huge this thing is on the countryside. Gigantic. So you have a great oxidation event, right? A depressurization from the inner earth. That's where all this oxygen comes from. There's an abundance of oxygen inside of the earth because there's giant plants that are growing inside of the earth. And there's an abundance of other types of algae and stuff that produce oxygen. And it's being stored up and kept in reserves. And whenever the magnetic field goes down, it releases all of those gases and they come up and it oxidizes our world on the surface, which is why post-apocalyptic movies and stuff often show you that sort of orange filter. That's from all of the rust, from all of the oxygen that is introduced into our world. And it creates, you know, a lot of rust and stuff and sand and dust and stuff like that. Anyways, so here's giant lobsters, which are bugs. Up here, look at that. It's like climbing up this hill over here. I'm assuming it's about as big as this guy at least, but it's gigantic. Huge, gigantic insects during the medieval times. This is clearly a tree. And these are two different lobsters, you know, on either side of this tree. Now, if you make lobsters look huge and gigantic, they're going to look alien to you, okay? So in the modern world, you see something gigantic like this, you're not going to see it as a bug. You're going to see this as an alien. You're going to see this as a monstrous being of some kind. You're not going to look at it for sure as some delicious meal that you can go to your seafood restaurant and eat. You're going to see this as a threat. You're going to run away from this. These were scouring the countryside all over the place during the Dark Ages until they settled in the ocean, where they remained pretty large to this day. The ocean is more buoyant. It keeps these types of creatures, bugs, large for a very long time. They don't have, you know, they have all that water to help them be buoyant. Now look at this one. It has a human being in its claws. Now, am I saying that this is the size of Africa? No. Okay, they've made it large so that you can tell what it is. But they put a tiny human in its claw to tell you its approximate size. That this lobster is gigantic. Let's just assume that he's like, 6 feet tall. So here we have a lobster that's about 30 feet long, right? And they put those on maps, not as fanciful, fun decorations. Hey, let's put a man-eating lobster, on the map up here, just for funsies. No, you could get killed for doing that. For lying, for misleading the king or the queen's armada, for lying to God, as oftentimes these cartographers were commissioned by monks and whatnot, or were monks themselves sometimes. Here's just a pop culture reference from a movie from the 70s that features a gigantic snail. There's going to be lots of pop culture references. Here's one of those ammonites I was telling you about. That's a shell. I don't know. It looks like a shell and some kind of snail, slug, worm type deal made that. But still here, they're going to tell you that's millions of years old. I'm telling you it's not. Here's one of the largest. This guy collects snail shells, as you can see by his collection behind him. Look how big that bad boy is. They'll tell you that that's really old or whatnot, but it's not. These are modern times. Now, let's look at some modern examples of gigantic snails that exist today in Africa. Like I said, if you look at their faces, they're almost kind of adorable. They almost look like rabbits, don't they? Doesn't that kind of look like a rabbit? If you see that as the ears, you know what I mean? This kind of looks rabbit looking. But look how giant this snail is. People have these as pets and stuff. Just like people in Japan have like pet beetles or whatever. Look at this gigantic, slimy, cute, nasty snail. And that's how big they can grow today. Look how big that shell is. If this snail dies then a rat or a kitten or a puppy or something could easily go and, live inside of it and use that for protection. Look how big that is. From the fingertips all the way down past the wrist. Huge shell. Look at this guy's petting this one. Look at the slime. See that slime? So as you can see, listen, so sometimes they can be benevolent, as in this case, all right? And if you apply this to medieval times or the Dark Ages in antiquity, you could see why some people could feasibly ride on top of them and work with them, and why some people would fear them. Here is the shell, right there. This is the shell. That is the snail that has paralyzed a fish with venom. And it just wraps it opens its snail mouth, and it comes all the way out of its shell as far as it can, and it swallows the fish. And goodbye, fish. Okay, so you can imagine if these bad boys, were not in the ocean and they were up on the land or whatever, and they were gigantic, what kind of damage, what kind of a serious threat a snail can be. People eat snails too, escargot in France. Maybe it's a way to get back at that snail cave, a giant snail in the snail cave. This particular snail is called the Conus geographus, popularly called the geography cone or the geographer cone, the geographic cone snail. And it's a species of predatory cone snail. It lives in reefs of the tropical Indo-Pacific, and it hunts small fish. Because that's, you can imagine if it was 20 feet larger, it would hunt human beings. While all cone snails hunt and kill prey using venom, the venom of the Conus geographus is potent enough to kill human beings. This one, right here, is potent enough all by itself, as big as it is now, to kill you now. Imagine when they get bigger. You ever see a coconut crab? Ooh. Here's another cute little snail eating like what looks like a carrot, or I don't know what it's doing. It looks less scary than the other one, you know what I mean? So I could see how some, people would plead with them and try to talk to them or whatever. And man, my eyes are looking bloodshot today. I don't know why. But anyways, that's besides the point. Check this one out. This one is very interesting. This is called a volcano snail, and its shell is made out of iron. It has an iron shell outer casing. It lives in hydrothermal vents and pretty much eats nothing. And because there's so much iron in the water around it in tiny particulates and stuff, it attaches to the shell and it creates an iron shell around this snail. Basically, indestructible snail. Amazing. Here it is, actually. So you can see there's some crabs and stuff down there, other bugs. A lot of these bugs don't care about, that's why a lot of these can survive the apocalypse, like cockroaches and stuff. You know what I mean? But here's the hydrothermal snail with the iron shell right here. That's something else, man. This world is so mysterious and strange. Wait until all the mysterious and strange things that are pretty much hidden and not talked about by mainstream news stations. Wait till they take over the world once more. Here's another type. I forgot what this one's called. It's actually this right here. It's not a snail, but this gives you an idea of why those knights would stay away. This thing is shooting slime, squirting it at its prey. I don't know what that slime does, but I imagine it's not good and you don't want to get that crap on you. I think they had some insects like this in the movie They Live, actually, and that slime was acidic in the movie. But here's its mouth, by the way. Pay close attention. Just so you know, you might want to stay away from phantazoids and not run up to them and pet them because they look so cute after the apocalypse. You might want to keep your distance and write down the pros and cons of these creatures as you learn about them, as they did in the Dark Ages. They were called bestiaries. Now, like I said, They can squirt things out of their mouths. Remember that snail that lived in the cave? Okay, we can't look at that too much. This one's more tolerable. That one's gross. Remember the snail at the beginning that lived in the caves of France? It was said to leave tendrils out of its mouth, laying in the cave system to catch its prey. Just like this worm right here is doing. That's disgusting, man. I can't even look at that for too long. Here is another type of worm. Now, imagine that these grow to gigantic sizes. We now have the possibility for real-life sandworms that are featured in our pop culture, like movies like Beetlejuice and Dune and Star Wars and stuff. Here's a worm that will hide in the sand, in the mud, in the muck. And when dinner comes nearby, it has a double mouth that opens up, snatches it, and then it goes back into the earth. Just like in the movie Tremors. This is real. This is in the ocean. This is why I don't mess with the ocean. Okay? There's giant bugs still down there from the old world. Giant monstrous creatures. This is small in comparison to what it will be when the oxygen is, when the world is re-oxygenized or whatever. Here's a cute version of the little rabbit snail that we saw earlier from the Neverending Story. The giant racing snail, you might remember. Here's a not so cute version where it's got slime and stuff coming out of its face, just like you saw in real life. But this is a movie, obviously. There's the racing snail. There's Willy Wonka. Or, whatever. It's funny because the dude is dressed like that's literally the Oompa Loompa from the new Willy Wonka movies, but he's dressed like Willy Wonka. I think that's so weird. Anyways, giant racing snail, he's feeding it, just like we saw that knight feeding the worm to the other snail. He feeds it, and they have a symbiotic relationship, right? He gets to ride on top of it. It's much faster because it's gigantic, as we discussed earlier. And here's another pop culture reference to just a huge one that's got crap growing all over its shell and stuff. It's got all these tentacles on its face coming out all over the place, just like the French snail that we talked about at the beginning of the story during the times of the Beast of Gévaudan. And that is our presentation for today. So I hope I've given you something at least interesting or amusing to consider, but I don't want to have amused you. I hope that you can peel back some of the layers on the Dark Ages and times not too long ago from recent antiquity, where monsters existed, where gigantic snails and insects and rodents and other creatures thrived, where the world was full of gigantic vegetation and huge tall grass and gigantic flowers and whatnot, because it might be helpful to you if it happens again and you survive a cataclysmic event that I call the plasma apocalypse. If you want more information on that event, check out my website, JayDreamerZ.com. And you can also see lots of visuals that I have on my website, lots of information to read about if you're interested in these types of things. And you can also check out my books as well. If you want to support me, come join us in the chat over at Patreon. A lot of people are talking and sharing pictures themselves over in my Patreon chat. And I'm going to start uploading exclusive documentaries, my own edited videos on particularly interesting subjects over on my Patreon. Those will be available probably sometime in the next month. So until next time, I'm JayDreamerZ saying good vibes and goodbye.
Hard to fade away, but something's forcing me to stay. It'd be easier for me if I turn do 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 do.